A failure in the fight for 15, meanwhile, the city of Flagstaff, Arizona, walking back a planned minimum wage increase that would have seen the city's lowest paid workers making at least $15 an hour by 2020. This coming after local businesses were forced to raise prices and in some instances close doors to cope with the rising cost of labor. Joining us right now, Employment Policy Institute Managing Director Michael Saltsman. Michael, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sure thing, yeah.
How quickly did Flagstaff begin to feel this economic pinch of this proposed increase?
Yeah, they began to feel it almost right away because, Flagstaff's minimum wage last year was in the $8 an hour range. So what Flagstaff was going to do is raise it by $4 an hour to 10 at the beginning of the year and then to 12 this summer. And I think the reaction of businesses can best be described as chaos. I mean, you had some businesses, again, raise prices. A number of businesses closed, like a yogurt shop, restaurants, a nut house cut back on staff. But I think the real pressure point was that service providers, nonprofits that serve the disabled in Flagstaff, warned they'd close down or leave the city entirely if this wasn't fixed.
And we've had small business managers and owners on this program who say, look, if I have to double the amount of hourly wages that I'm paying my employees, I'm going to have to cut jobs. We've also seen a similar impact in two other cities who've already raised their minimum wage as high as $15 an hour. That's Seattle, SeaTac, Washington. What's your take on this?
What's interesting, I guess, Mike, my question to you is, did healthcare costs come up at all in the calculus of what was going on in Flagstaff about the cost of employment? Because it's not just the wage that you pay, but it's also the all-in cost with benefits included.
There was a broader conversation there, both for all employers and then among tipped employers, for instance, who were looking at a unique increase in their costs as well. I think in Flagstaff and more broadly, I think what's happening is you could probably say the fight for 15 is maybe losing a little steam because I think even legislators who are to the left of center, even in Baltimore just this past week, you had the mayor veto a proposal to go to 15 there. I think they're realizing that there is no free lunch in this debate and that there's only so high you can raise the minimum wage and so quickly you can go before customers just aren't going to pay for it anymore and you have to do drastic cutbacks elsewhere or close entirely.
Hey, Michael, one of the whole debates that went on with the fight for 15 is the lack of a real discussion on geographic diversity. Because obviously, the idea of putting this federal mandate on areas where, there's maybe a few different stores or you're in a rural area and, I think that even, someone like myself who's for an increased minimum wage, much more on a gradual approach, I think it has to be with taking into account the geography and stuff. What's your perspective on that and where do you see it going?
Yeah, so I think it's an excellent point. I think it's probably debatable whether a $15 minimum wage makes sense anywhere. Maria mentioned Seattle, and even Seattle going to 15 has seen some reduction in opportunities for the least skilled employees. But I think it should be completely uncontroversial, for instance, that a $15 minimum wage makes no sense for a city like Baltimore, a city like Cleveland, and certainly rural areas where even the median wage may be below $15 an hour. And so I think you're going to see legislators taking a really hard look at this as they start to understand that the real face of 15 is not a large corporation. It's a small business where the owner is probably working right alongside the employees and just can't, is barely breaking even as is, and 15 is going to put him or her under.
So one of the things that I see over and over again is that voters buy positive, they don't buy negative stories. The whole story about the minimum wage raise has been, look, if that happens, then all these bad things are going to happen. But if you talk about on the positive side, people are like, oh, $15, that sounds great. So how do you turn this around and say this isn't just a negative story, a fear story of if we do this, all these companies are going to close, all this bad stuff happens. How do you talk about what good is going to happen if we let the states decide for themselves?
Well, I think the upside is, long term, what we want to have is people who are working their way up the career ladder have the opportunity to continue to succeed. And so if you say, well, the full-time starter wage is going to be $30,000 a year, which is $15 an hour full-time, you're going to lock a lot of folks out of the workforce. And so I think the positive story is, let's look at what's happened. Let's see what have been the unintended consequences. And then what happens if you allow the market to work and if you allow people who currently don't have opportunity to work their way up the career ladder. I think that's a much more positive story. And I think what the data shows is long-term is that people who do have that early workforce experience are earning more in the future. They're more likely to be in a better job. And so I think that's a compelling message. But you're right, it has to be paired, I think, with very specific stories, not just generalities about losing jobs, but specific stories about small businesses and people's communities that have closed down.
Yeah, and what they keep saying is, look, people want to earn more than the minimum wage. That's the point. So far, 17 states have already raised the minimum wage, and another 19 are expected to do so right now. Will we see the first $15 statewide, the minimum wage this year? There's the states raising minimum wage in 2017. We'll see the impact in terms of the economy. Michael, great to have you on the program this morning. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Michael Saltsman joining us there.